So as with Daryl, Sherry and her husband George have had their collection written about. So this is an article, I think was it Essence or Ebony? Which magazine?
Heart and Soul.
Heart and Soul, that's right, I'm sorry. Heart and Soul magazine several years ago. Did you put both pictures in there? All right. So this was my home that they sold on the water in Annapolis. It's like 5,000 square feet water view. It was absolutely fabulous. And they have since repatriated themselves and moved back into DC. But the house is absolutely fabulous. And the other photograph was one of the art collection in their home. And Sherry and I have known each other for many, many years, and she and her husband have been very, very supportive of the gallery. So I'll read her bio in brief, because everyone is so accomplished. So Sherry Bellamy is counsel with the law firm Leftwich and Ludway, LLC, and her legal work includes litigation and regulatory matters. She also serves as vice president of L&L Consulting, LLC, with expertise in management, consulting, executive coaching, and diversity consulting. She's a former executive with Verizon Communications, and she served in a variety of roles, including responsibility with Verizon and its predecessor companies. So I give to you, Sherry. I just do this.
Into the mic.
Okay. I'm sort of surprised, frankly, that Myrtis said come and be part of this group, because my collection is so eclectic that it's hard to categorize. I just buy what I fall in love with, and I don't think it through very carefully. So I'm sitting here listening to Dr. Atwell and thinking, I didn't think about that, especially right after school. But we have a lot of connections, because I found out his brother and I used to work together at Verizon for several years. And Malcolm Brown, who you mentioned, he and his wife Ernestine are my cousins. So part of the reason that I love art so much, I guess I just grew up thinking this was one way of making your home wonderful. So Myrtis asked us to sort of contemplate a few questions. And what started us collecting? Why do we collect? Why do we spend as much of our money as we do on purchasing art? And my husband and I have raised 4 children. We now have 4 grandchildren. And part of the reason we began collecting was to have these things in our homes. The images that our children grew up with were always ones that were positive. They were African and African American images for the most part. And so it was important to us to just build that sense of self-worth. In our home was a sanctuary from everything else they might see. When they went outside, they might encounter a lot of other things. But as a result, my husband's an architect, I'm an attorney. Our children are all in the arts, which I really should have thought better of, because it's not nearly as lucrative as some other professions. But among the contemporary artists that Dr. Atwell is collecting are many of Rashida's friends, because she's worked with them at the Studio Museum. My oldest daughter was Studio Museum in Harlem, and then at the Kitchen, another place in Harlem. So in addition to making our home beautiful, it also created a cultural sort of sanctuary for all of us. With respect to how I went about this, I think I started off as the person who just bought posters, but I didn't throw anything away. Trust me, that wasn't me she told that story about. But I bought things that I fell in love with. And I learned early on, and in 35 years now of marriage, that you have to buy things that you both fall in love with, or you'll end up parting with things. I learned that the hard way when my husband came home from a trip and I had spent a substantial sum on a piece, and he walked in and said, "What in the world is that?" So you have to do it as a family. And part of what we have done with our children is we've gotten them very engaged in the collection, in the thinking through the collection. My daughter is encouraging me to buy more contemporary artists, and I have begun to do that. But a few of them have shown up at Swan. Kellogg Lindsay was in a recent Swan auction. So they're slowly making their way to that institution, but it is too slow. But the other thing that I think is important in acquiring art is displaying art. I mean, one of the reasons that I love my art is because it graces my home. It makes it special. So when people come in, one of the things that they almost always do is start wandering around looking at things. They sort of say hi and then they just go off. So, and that to me is really important, that it does create an atmosphere. And so don't buy a piece if you can't display it. I actually have a couple pieces in storage. I should give them to Myrtis because they're too large for our new place. And I can't display them properly. But buy pieces, in my mind, you buy pieces that you love and you buy pieces that you can use and display and that you can protect. I mean, you don't buy extremely fragile things when you have 2-year-olds running around, but you might buy them by the time they're 15 and they won't harm them. So we sort of have thought this through as this is how we make our home feel like us. So I can walk into a place that's just bare walls and within hours it'll be our home because of the art. I never thought about art as an investment. I guess it truly is, but that wasn't ever my motivating factor. I thought of it as things that were just beautiful, and I just like to surround myself with them. One of the reasons I think that's an important thing, though, is as an investment, it will appreciate in value, but I actually believe that that value will transmit to your children, to your legacy, because like most serious collectors, you never want to part with a piece if you love it. And so it may have appreciated substantially, but you won't let it go anyhow. So don't think of this as this is part of my investment portfolio. It's part of your legacy. It's part of what you probably will to others, but it's probably not what you're going to live on when you're 75. I don't think. So a few pieces that I'm just showing a few things. Like I said, it's very eclectic. This piece was, we literally were walking down the street in Paris through a section that had a number of galleries, and we saw this in the window, and we all three, my youngest daughter, myself, and my husband, stopped in our tracks and said, "What is that?" We went in, we talked about what the art was. It's actually done by a European, a white artist. It's not by an African-American artist, but it's all made out of pieces of the innards of computers. So he's taken the keys and the foam and all sorts of things, and you can't tell from this image, unfortunately, but it's actually within a store display. So if you open it up, he's built this inside and then you close it. Now it wasn't an expensive piece, but on our very last day in Paris, my youngest daughter, who was only 11 or 12, I said, "What do you want to do for our last day in Paris?" And she said, "Well, aren't we going to go back and get that piece of art?" So we did, and we brought it home, and we all love it. Here's one of the contemporary artists, Simone Lee, a wonderful woman, very creative. She builds all sorts of incredible ceramic sculptures. The piece we've acquired from her is one of her cowrie shells. And you see at the top, you can come and look at these closer later, but if you see at the top, she's actually constructing it. That's in her studio. The chandelier is actually dozens of these cowrie shells on tensile wires hanging. This was a display at the kitchen when my daughter recently curated a show for Simone. She's a fabulous, wonderful artist. You like Simone? You know Rashida too. See, it's a small world. So she's one of the newer artists that we are promoting and we are supporting. So hopefully get more of her things. And then I also don't just buy African American art. This is a Southwest artist of Mexican descent. We were in San Antonio, and we just loved this piece. It just spoke to us. Again, it called us from off the street. We were walking out the gallery, I saw his face, and we went in and we had to acquire it. And she's actually a very well-established Mexican-American artist in California, Roberta de la Vega. And this purportedly is a self-portrait, but she does wonderful work. But then we have two things that we really focus on, the 20th century masters and African art, and Shona sculpture in particular. This is one that I actually acquired at Swan with Myrtis' help. It's a tiny sculpture, it's not that large, it's only 9 inches high, but her face just called, again, it was an emotional attachment. I saw it, I fell in love with her, and I told her, geez, we have to have this. And so I don't even remember what we paid. I just know that it was one of those ones where I had to have it, and Myrtis is skillful enough to know how to bargain know how to bid and know when to stop bidding when there were a couple pieces that she told me, you just can't have those. I'm sorry. She knew my limits. And this is a print. These are prints actually by Calvin Burnett. They're hand-colored woodcut prints. But the interesting thing, again, this was at Swan's. What the catalog showed was the piece at the top, which is sort of a reflection. But if you were actually in the gallery space and you went at the preview, you found out that there were actually 2 pieces in this lot. No one who was calling in by phone, no one who just saw the catalog even knew that. So we got quite a bargain when we acquired these. And this piece is actually metal. It's a painted copper plate. Richard Hunt, he's a sculptor. So most of what you see by him is nothing like this. They are very interesting abstract pieces. This was unusual, and Myrtis and I both fell in love with this one. It was sort of tucked in a corner, and it was a bargain. And here's a few of my Shona pieces. I'm going to have to tell this one quick story, because the way we met Myrtis was through another gallerist in Washington. And you saw that picture of that house we had in Annapolis. Now, it was literally right on the Chesapeake Bay. And we moved there, the house was vast. It was much bigger than what we had moved from. It was too large. And I had these dreams that we were literally going to be washed out in the bay. Now, don't ask me. But I kept thinking it was just too insubstantial. And one day I got up and I told my husband, what we need in this house are stones to weigh it down and keep it anchored. Now, this sounds insane. I understand that. I'm admitting this to a whole group of people, but I actually thought we needed something to weight this place, to give it heft. It was vast, big, empty, white spaces, and it felt too empty to me. And so someone introduced us to Myrtis, who at that point she didn't have a gallery space, but she was going back and forth to Zimbabwe and bringing back wonderful Shona sculptures. And so George and I went to see her pieces. This one's almost life-size. This is one by Tutani, who's just a wonderful artist. We have a few of his things. And so we went to see her sculptures in this storage space that she was working from at the time. And we walked through, and we sort of looked at dozens of pieces, and we said, well, we got to go and sit and think about it. And we had her set about maybe 9 pieces, 8 or 9 pieces aside. We said, we're going to think about which ones we're going to get. We came back, and I had convinced my husband that if we really bought all of them, our home would be safer for it. So, a very creative way of getting what I wanted, but it worked. And so we actually acquired several wonderful pieces of sculpture from Zimbabwe with Myrtis' assistance, and we've continued to collect these pieces over the years. This is our favorite. And that same day, this piece actually was damaged. And Myrtis assumed no one would buy it, so she would be able to keep it for her personal collection. That didn't work out as planned, because she did say that she knew someone who was skillful enough to repair it and bring it back to what it should be. And so we acquired that. And so whenever she visits, she goes over and she rubs his head. We call him the prophet. It's just probably one of the nicest pieces we own. Big speed up. This piece we actually acquired down in Texas. We had already begun collecting Shona, and we just saw this piece again in a little gallery in San Antonio, you know, while we were there. But it was probably the same trip where we bought the little Vega piece. And you can't see in this image just the incredible work on this vase. But this is one of the better stones of the Shona pieces. There's various kinds of stones, and this one is verdite, which is actually semi-precious. It's just wonderful to work with. Now, she did ask me to name or at least identify. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. One of the things Myrtis asked is, please identify some of your most important pieces. And to me, I don't know quite how to read that, because what might be important to me may not be important in Myrtis's eyes. But I knew at least there are a few that she would think were among my most important. This is a Richard Mayhew. Now, she and I have been talking about getting a Mayhew for years, and we've gone and we've looked and we've all, and sometimes we've actually come back and said, no, that's not a great example of his work. But we found one. I was not actually at the auction. I was busy with work, and I trusted Myrtis to acquire it for me. I'd just seen it on, you know, the images. And when she delivered it and we opened it, I literally had tears in my eyes, because it is quintessential Richard Mayhew. It's one of the nicest pieces that I have in my collection. This is a very small piece, actually, that is by a lesser-known master, Charles Ethan Porter. He was from Connecticut. He spent some time in Paris. And this is another one that I literally just fell in love with. It really is in my husband's taste because it's so cute. But it is probably a wonderful example of this type of classical painting from the late 1800s. Particularly the way that he handled the glaze that makes that pot look like you could reach in and touch it. And one thing I found was I saw this piece and then I just researched Porter because I really didn't know his work. And absolutely fell in love with this, and so we did acquire that one. Again, that was this one. And this piece is probably my pride and joy. We acquired it right here at Myrtis's Galerie, and it was not in very good condition. It was damaged, it was dirty, you could not tell what all the images were. But literally, I walked around, as we always do when we come here, because she's always got so many things. And I went back to this and said, I don't even know who this is by. I don't have the sheet, but I want this. And probably 10 minutes later, Dorian Bolger walked in from the museum, from the Baltimore Museum of Art, and said, I want this. And I was able to say to Dorian, I got it first. But we did have to restore it. It required substantial work. So we went to an institution in New York called Federa Fine Arts. And we did have a PDF, I probably don't have time to show it, of the restoration process. But they restored both the painting and the frame, because it was the original frame. The painting was done probably in the 40s. It's got a great provenance, and it is just a phenomenal piece, and it is my pride and joy. So. It's a neglected collection, but it's become much more educated with the help of folks like Myrtis and others.